Okay, Michiamo, just give me a couple of seconds. I'm just finishing the setup. Okay, Michiamo, I'm just finishing the setup. Can you send me a message and let me know that the sound is good? Send me a message in the chat. Okay, we're just finishing the setup real quick. I have to send out a message and then we'll get started. But in the meantime, just one of the viewers just send me a message just so we can know that that you hear me clearly. And I'm going to post the document, send out a message to let people know we're on, and then we'll get started. Okay, so I just posted the document, Odomankoma, Atmu Khopa, that we're dealing with today. Okay, cool. You can hear me good, and I just want to send out one more message, and then we'll be straight. Okay, just give me 1 second and we'll get started. All right, let me pull the chat up right quick. Okay. Alright, Michiamo, Midinde, Odwirafo, Kwesi, Nehem, Ptah, Akhan, and AKANFO, NANASOM, Da. That means my name is Odwirafo, Kwesi, Nehem, Ptah, Akhan. I am the Odwirafo of Akwamu Mine, Amarukai Tifi Mu, which is the Akwamu Nation in North America. Today is AKANFO, NANASOM Day, which is ancient, authentic, Akan, ancestral religion. We are in the midst of a series on the creative Obosom. What we did first was we had a 3-part series on NANASOM Ne Amamre, which is Afua, Khanit, ancestral religion and culture. So we talked about the nature and function of the Kra, the Okra, no Krawa, the soul, the divine consciousness, our personal Obosom, in relationship to Nyamewaa-Nyame and the entire cosmology. The second piece we went into was the nature and function of the NANASOM Nsamanfo, which are the honored ancestresses and ancestors, as well as the Nsamanfo Pa, which are our good ancestresses and ancestors who may not have been necessarily spiritually cultivated, but they were good people. So we talked about the nature and function of the Nsamanfo, the ancestresses and ancestors in our lives. The Afua, of course, ancestresses and ancestors in our lives. Then the third piece was the nature and function of the Obosom, the forces of nature, the goddesses and gods, the children of Nyamewaa-Nyame, the great god and the great goddess, the spirit forces that operate through the sun, through the moon, through the stars, Earth Mother, oceans, rivers, planets, fire, water, all natural forces in nature. So we dealt with that. Then we went through an 11-part series, the Khanit and Bosom series, and we talked about that specific company of Abosom, the Akradin Bosom, that govern the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies that govern our 7-day Akan week. And of course they're called Akradin Bosom because we are named in Akan culture after these Abosom. Excuse me. So we went through those, and then we talked about Asaase Afua and Asaase, the Two Earth Mother Abosom after that. And then last week we started a series on the creative Abosom, the major creative powers. Of course, the creator and the creatress are in Akan culture the Nyamewaa-Nyame and the Nyamewaa-Nyame, which in ancient Kemet we call Ra and Raet. And in Bodu they call Da and Aito Weto, and in Yoruba they say Odumare and Oshumare, the great creative power, the creator and creatress, operating through the sun, using the sun and other stars as physical transmitters of their spiritual power, operating through the rainbow, often taking the form of the rainbow serpent or the circular serpent that swallows its tail. So we went into that last week. Now we want to get into Odomankoma in Akan culture, who is also called Atem or Atem Khopa, Atem Khepra in ancient Kemet. So before we get into Odomankoma, we posted the article on the chat. Does anybody have any questions before we move ahead? And give me 1 second. But if you have any questions, type them in the chat. All right. Okay, so no questions on that? All right. So let's get into Odomankoma and the nature of this Abosom. Now, the reason why we're doing this series, we have a document that we published dealing with this Abosom. Very often, generally in Akan culture today, contemporary Akan culture, very often they attempt to force the idiocy of monotheism on Afua culture because our people have been infected with white culture, with the perversity of white culture. And that has crept into the ancestral religious practices and traditions. So people who are brainwashed with that false idea of monotheism and would like to, harmonize or actually engage in disorder and link up with the mindset of the whites and their offspring, they attempt to force fit the idiocy of monotheism into Afua ancestral religion. In reality, there has always been the Great Father and the Great Mother, two distinct beings that function as one divine entity, which is a supreme being. In ancient Kemet and Khanit, ancient Egypt, ancient Nubia, we call the Great Father Amen and the Great Mother Amenet, sometimes called Amen Ra and Amenet Raet. In Akan, Amen is called Nyame and Amenet is called Nyamewaa. So that's the Great Father and the Great Mother. It's the same across the board in Afua, wherever we are in the world, we attune ourselves to the Great Father and the Great Mother, and we have a direct link to them through our Okra. Through the Okra, that's male, Okrawa is female, the divine consciousness. Now, whites and their offspring, of course, try to force fit monotheism. They manufacture that foolish doctrine, number one, because they are incapable of attuning to any divinity at all. They don't have a Kra, they don't have a divine consciousness, they can't communicate with the Abosom, the forces in nature. They can't, of course, communicate with the honorable ancestresses and ancestors of Afua. They cannot communicate with the Supreme Being. So they attempted to create a false entity, a pseudo-deity, in their own image, and then say that was the only deity that existed. Move and try to say that all the divinities that we attune ourselves to don't exist, and therefore, in order to get to the false divinity that they created, we must go through them, and everything else is irrelevant. Now, of course, that's foolishness, and most of our people rejected that for hundreds of years, over the course of a couple of thousand years. But after the advent of enslavement, some of our people began to embrace that foolishness, and it has crept into the traditional practices across the continent, as well as wherever we have migrated to or been forced to migrate to in different parts of the world. So when you read about Akan culture and cosmology, and then even if you communicate with people in Ghana, people who are AKANFO in Ghana or Ivory Coast, most often they will tell you that Nyame is quote unquote God. They don't know who the Great Mother is. They don't even acknowledge the fact that there is a Great Mother, or maybe they pay lip service and say Nyame includes male and female, which is not accurate, because they're just totally denying the reality of Nyamewaa. Or they will say that Nyankompon is just another name of Nyame, Odomankoma is another name of Nyame, Obuade is another name of Nyame, Tretriampong is another name of Nyame, and so forth. And of course, all of these are actually different Abosom, different divinities, all of whom are subordinate to Nyame and Nyamewaa. So, so when we're going through these different documents, these publications, we publish these to let people know the details about, number one, who the actual Abosom are, and then we show their origins. We show their origins in ancient Kemet, in Khanit, all the way to West Africa, the same language, the same descriptive titles in both languages, the same functions in nature in both languages, and then of course we carried that culture from West Africa into the Western Hemisphere during the Musuo-Kessie, or the Great Perversity enslavement. So that culture has come from the ancient eastern part of the continent to the west and carried in our kra nemoja, our blood, our soul and our blood, to where we are right now. So we're doing that sankofa, going all the way back, returning, going and grasping the truth, no kware, and then reestablishing that in our culture, in our families, in our communities. So, let's hold on one second. I thought I saw a question. Okay, I'm not sure. You might have to, it looks like you're having a little problem, but you might have to log out and log back in. that might help it. Sometimes that recalibrates the system and you'll be able to hear it clearly. Okay, so Odomankoma. First, when we're looking at, we want to show the etymology of the term. So we talk about Atem first. This is the divinity from ancient Kemet, a creative power in ancient Kemet. You often see Atem symbolized sitting inside of the red sun, or the red Aten, the setting sun. So they would talk about Khepra in the form of a beetle operating through the rising Aten, the rising sun. There's a text talking about when Ra is saying, I am Khepra in the morning, Ra in the noon, and Atem in the evening. The text is talking about three different Abosom. Khepra is not just another form of Ra. Khepra is an Abosom, a divinity that actually serves Ra, and he operates through the rising Aten, or sun. Ra represents the radiant, effulgent, burning, radiant power of the sun. The expansive or the explosive power of the Aten, or the sun, or fire, is Khepra, the radiant aspect of it. Ra operates through that, and Ra operates through that. And then the consuming aspect, or the setting sun, we're dealing with Atem as well as Atemet. So you'll see Atem sitting inside of a red sun, and the sun is setting between the two mountains on the horizon, on the western horizon of Manu. So in the text, and you also see Atem as a male divinity wearing the red and the white crown. So when you see the setting sun, and you read the different texts, and they say when the sun sets, and Atem sets in the sun in the west, and then he sends the cool north winds called Kebu to purify us and refresh us. So you see that image as we have in the text, the red sun sitting between the two mountains on the horizon. Now you'll read also in the text, like the coffin text and others, that Atem is connected to the great Bennu bird in Anu, which they call Heliopolis now, the great sun city, the great solar city, that's the major sanctuary of the temple of Ra. And the Bennu bird, you'll see the Bennu bird flies over the primordial waters. And then even today, when you see Bennu birds, they're flying over the waters, and then when there's a little mound rising up out of the water, then the Bennu bird will set on that mound. And Atem was shown as the soul or the Ba of the Bennu bird. So we quote the coffin text talking about Atem flying through, the ancient primordial creation over the primordial waters. And when the primordial mound rises up for the first time, the Bennu bird, Atem operating through the Bennu bird, sets on that primordial mound. Now, if we look at the cosmology, we talked about Amen and Amenet, the great being. Then you have Ka and Ka'et, which is the great black substance of space. So you have Amen and Amenet, who are the great being. Their consciousness, or their divine soul, intelligence, they give birth to twin divinities called Ka and Ka'et. And they utilize those two forces as forces of consciousness. Just like you can employ your mind, your consciousness right now, if you close your eyes in the darkness, to generate images, thoughts, forms, and ideas. You can make that decision. You can also stop it. You can direct your consciousness to do that, and you can direct your consciousness to stop doing that. Amen and Amenet created Ka and Ka'et, forces of consciousness, male and female forces of consciousness, intelligence, and direct them to generate forms, ideas, and so forth. So their shrine is the black substance of space, the all-pervasive black substance of space. And the invisible being is Amen and Amenet that permeates that black substance. That is a black plasma, and the invisible being is Amen and Amenet. The term Amen, the noun Amen, means hidden, or adjective means hidden or concealed. Amen also means permanent, stable, abiding, and so forth. So Amen and Amenet are the great hidden, permanent, stable, abiding being. They're the origin of all things. Nothing goes beyond Amen and Amenet. When they decide to generate a universe, they connect and they give birth to the forces, male and female forces of consciousness, which is Ka and Ka'et, two entities, two spiritual forces that they then employ to generate forms. Now, when they generate these forms, they have to, in order for things to come alive and become part of a created universe, they have to expand and contract. They have to have the power of life and movement. So they give birth to the two male and female forces of expansion and contraction in the sense of the breathing process, the boundless expansion and contraction. These two divinities are Hehu and Hehut. And that's basically the breathing, expansion, and contractive force within the black substance. And then that black substance begins to start to move and vibrate. And those vibrations are the birth of the two primordial energy, inert energy divinities, Nu and Nut, also called Nun and Nonet. And their Medutu, their hieroglyphics are written with the wavy lines representing electromagnetic energy, but energy in potential, infinite energy in potential that has not yet birthed anything, but it has the capacity to birth whatever is needed. Then Nun and Nunet are born, and these two wavy energies, when they unite, they give birth to the radiant, spiraling energy of fire and light, which is Ra and Ra'et, who bursts forth from the darkness, pierces the darkness, and that's the first light in the creation of the universe. And as Ra and Ra'et move through the blackness and create spheres of blackness, these spheres become stars, and from the stars come planets, and so forth. So we go into that whole process when in the document. So this is just a quick summary, and we kind of summarized this before in the previous session. So when Ra and Ra'et, or Nyankumpon and Nyankunton, are moving through the black substance and carving out spheres, very similar, as we said before, to the black substance is an immaterial substance, is formless, there's an invisible being operating through it. When that being begins to create movement, expansion, and contraction, the black substance begins to vibrate, just like water in a pot beginning to boil when heat is added to it. Heat, the invisible expansive and contractive force that causes vibrations or waves, and those waves, Nu and Nut, eventually vibrate to the extent so rapidly that they begin to birth spheres, and those spheres, that fire and heat inside the spheres burst forth from the water, and that's like the birth of Ra and Ra'et. And when Ra and Ra'et are moving through the black substance of space, they create black spheres. And of course, in physics and astronomy, stars are called black bodies. So those first black bodies become the bodies of the other stars, and then from the stars, of course, we get the planets, and one of those planets is Asaase Afua, which is our planet. So our primordial planet was another portion of the black substance of space, a black sphere, and then Ra and Ra'et's energy, they begin to move through that black sphere and expand and contract and begin to develop within that sphere the different divisions that would become the earth as it is today. The fire of Ra and Ra'et go into the core, the innermost core of the planet, giving birth to Ptah and Sekhmet, who operate through the innermost core of the planet, and their specific expansion and contraction that give birth to form. The thermodynamics within the core generate form, and when you look at the lineage of the Abosom, you'll see that there's Ptah, then you'll see Atem. So when they talk about Ptah generating the first mound, and then, or hillock, and then Atem sitting on the first mound, we're talking about, on one hand, Ptah at the core of the earth, through the expansion and contraction of his force in connection with Sekhmet, generating, of course, the mantle, upper mantle, lower mantle, and the upper mantle, and so forth, and then the lower crust and the upper crust, and going through that whole process. Atem and Atemet, they're in that process as well. But when you see Atem in the red sun and setting on in the west between the two mountains on the horizon, what you're seeing is the sun setting is akin to a seed being planted in the ground. So that fiery energy that's in the sun, it sets and it penetrates the Earth Mother. So when they talk about Ptah generating that mound and fashioning the mound, it rises up out of the primordial waters of Earth, and that's the first mound that ever existed in the world. Of course, that's the great Ka and the Kayet, the raised land, the Ka and the Kayet. Then Ra and Ra'et move through that land to animate it. They become Afura and Afuraet when they're moving through that Ka. So that's Afura Ka, Afuraet Kayet, the land of Afura, the land of Afuraet. Of course, that's Africa. So once the land is fertile and vibrant and has the capacity to give life, then you have the setting sun setting. When that sun sets and penetrates and goes into the earth, that's like a seed being planted in the earth. It's the completion of the day. The sunrise begins, and at sunset, that's the completion of the day. But then when the sun penetrates and goes down into the earth, then it enlivens the earth once more, regenerates the earth, and that's the end of the day, but there's the beginning of a new cycle, another 12-hour cycle that will cease once the sun rises in the east again. So when you see Atem setting in the sun, that's penetrating the earth, that's a seed being planted. Now, there are a number of different terms or definitions of the term Atem and different ways that his name is spelled. Atem, Atum, Tem, Temu, Atemu, and so forth. The basic fundamental meanings of those terms means all, complete, to bring it into, to finish, to complete, compact, hard substance, and so forth. And when you think about that force operating through the setting sun, you see he completes the day, he goes down into the earth, he creates a hard, compact substance, he completes the creative process. All those different things are associated with Atem. Now, when that earth mound first exists, he's the first male Abosom to set on the hill. That's where you get the notion of Atem, the first male to sit on the primordial earth, being Adam, the first man to be made or stand on the earth. And Atem operating through the red sun This is why they say Atem, the root of Atem or Dem, means red or ruddy. So the red or ruddy male, the first male to exist in the world, this is where they get that notion from. Atem is a fictional character who never existed, period. The whites and their offspring trying to manufacture fake personages and fake divinities to get us to worship them. They draw a picture of a white male. They want us to worship this white male, or create sculptures of this white male. Of course, we weren't going for that in ancient Kemet, so they decided to try to attach a philosophy and a cosmology to this white statue of themselves they just created. But they have to give this statue a name. They have to give it some kind of history, some kind of human history or deity history. So they take corrupted titles of the Abosom that we're familiar with and add them to their fake personages, their little statues, and so forth. And this is where you get all the so-called biblical characters from. They're fictional characters. They're fiction images of the whites and their offspring, and they're trying to figure out a way to make us worship them through these manufactured characters. So they name them with corruptions of titles from ancient Kemet, descriptive titles of deities and personages from ancient Kemet. They add to these newly created fictional white statues, murals, and so forth. So this is where you get the whole Atem piece from. So getting back to Atem in the real sense, he's the first male Abosom. So now the text, once he sits on the hillock, now he begins to create. Now the text, there's a little kink in the text. And we talked about this in Asaase Afua and Asaase Ya, the Earth Mother Abosom. The kink is not from what we created, but the whites and their offspring Egyptologists trying to force foolishness into the text. So they talk about how Atem creates Shu and Tafnut, the male and female twins of expansion and contraction, and then Shu operating through fire and the air and the atmosphere, and Tefnut operating through water, moisture, and so forth. And then Shu and Tefnut give birth to Geb, which is earth, and Nut, which is sky. And after earth and sky are created, Geb and Nut, earth and sky, unite, and then they give birth to Asar, Aset, Set, and Nebet. And Asar operating through the black soil substance of earth, Aset operating through the river waters of earth, Set operating through the red soil, whether it's the desert or the red clay, and then Nebet operating through the rain waters of earth, as well as the kidneys in your body, and Aset operating through the reproductive system, the vagina and uterus structure, Asar operating through the pituitary gland, Set operating through the nervous system, and so forth. So they give birth to these four divinities. Asar and Aset give birth to Heru, of course. Set and Nebet give birth to Anpu. Hold on one second, I got a little message up here. I've got a little error message right quick. Let me see what this is. All right. Okay, I had a little error message, so if you have any issues, okay, the brother said that he rebooted and everything was clear for him. So if you have any issues, just send a message in the chat and then we can reset some things. But when Atem is creating, in order to give birth to Shu and Tafnut, they say that he spit out Shu and spit out Tafnut, and what they say is that the Europeans, when they're translating these texts, hold on a second. Okay, the suggestion I gave to Sashep was to log out of the system and log back in, or even if you rebooted your system, but first just try to log out and then log back in. Log out, close out of Ustream, then get back into Ustream and see if that works, or else reboot, and that usually takes care of it. Okay, so they'll say that while he was creating Shu and Tafnut, the expansion and contractive force, the twin forces of expansion and contraction operating through the fire and air and water, he spit out Shu and spit out Tafnut and gave birth to them. The Europeans translating the text, the Egyptologists translating the text, they'll say that Atem masturbated and spit out Shu and spit out Tafnut. And they always try to associate sexual deviance and perversity with our culture because that's their culture, and they're always trying to denigrate our culture. And of course, that's not part of our culture. So what happens is when you're reading the text, for example, the book of knowing the manifestations of Ra and of overthrowing Apep, what you'll see in the creation account is Atem saying that I had union with my Kahabit or Kahabat, which is the so-called aura, and also saying I grasped myself in an embrace and grasped my Kahabit with my clenched hand, had union with my hand, embraced my aura as a wife, and then we gave birth to Shu and Tafnut. Now, the wife of Atem, and there are two major female Abosom, Asaase or Iusaaset, Nebet Hetepet, and Iusaaset Nebet Pet. And Iusaaset Nebet Hetepet, she's called the Lady of the Vulva. She's also called the Hand of Atem. Now the reason why she's called the Hand of Atem is because if you look at a male has two hands, and then we would say a female has three, and we mentioned this in the previous talking about Asaase, Afua, and Asaase Yah. The vulva is considered like a hand because it grasps. So when we said in ancient Kemet that Nebet Hetepet is the hand of Atem, it wasn't saying that he united with his clenched hand, meaning sexual deviance or masturbation or anything like that. He united with the hand of Atem, which is Nebet Hetepet, or Iusaaset Nebet Hetepet, the hand of Atem. All that means is when the third hand of the female, which is the vulva, the vagina, it makes her an active participant in the procreative process because it grasps just like the two hands grasp. So from the very beginning, we understood that the female is not just a passive non-participant in the procreative process. She doesn't just exist as an empty shell and wait for the male to come and fill up her empty shell with a life-giving seed, and she's just a container for the seed, and everything comes from the male. From the very beginning, she's an equal and complementary active participant in the procreative process. Just by nature of who she is, she's a magnet for the male. The female is a magnet for the male, so her magnetism actually stimulates him to come in and unite with her. So that's an activity, that's an active participant. The ovum is a magnet for the sperm cell. So the sperm cell doesn't just look for just swim around and bump into something. It's being drawn in. So the female, again, is an active participant. The vulva or the vagina structure is not a passive participant, but symbolizing it as a hand, showing that it's an active participant, that it grasps the male and pulls the seed out of the male. So everything is magnetism, is active part of the procreative process. So this is why Iusaaset, Nebet Hetepet, part of her name in the Medutu is the determinative of the vulva. She is the hand of Atem. So when Atem says that he had union with his hand, he's talking about the hand of Atem, or Iusaaset Nebet Hetepet. Now, they also talk about, when they say grasp, that term is kefa or kafa. And then, of course, the kahabit or the kahabat is the aura that he says he took and embraced as a wife. So now we're talking about Atem, and I'm talking about the female divinity. Hold on one second, I got this error message once again. Alright. We're talking about the female divinity that he's embraced and united with to create Shu and Tafnut. Kafa, to grasp, or the clenched hand or clenched fist, and Kahaba, the aura, taken as a wife. If anybody knows something about the pseudo-language of Hebrew, they'll understand that Eve, the so-called wife of Adam, her name is not spelled Eve, that's English, it's spelled Hawwwah or VVAH. So it's Hava or Hawa or Haba. So it's not Adam and Eve, it's Atem and Haba, Hawa, Kafa, Kava, Kaba. That's all connected to Atem, his clenched fist, Kafa or Kefa. That's the same as Kava or Chava, or later Eve. And the Kahabit or Kahaba is the Kahaba, Kahawa, which is Eve. So it's Atem and the Kahabit, Atem, and the Kafa, Atem, and Iusaaset, Nebet, Hetepet. This is where they get Adam and Eve from. They took those titles of real divinities, they took their descriptive titles, they took aspects of their functions, and then they added them to the white individual murals that they created and statues they created, and attempted to say that these little white statues were real people and the Abosom of ancient Kemet are fictional. But in reality, Atem operates through the setting sun, and Iusaaset, Nebet, Hetepet, and Iusaaset, Nebet, the two Earth Mother divinities, two female divinities. When Atem, as a setting sun, penetrates Earth and excites the energy of the planet, of the great mothers, then you have a fertile Earth, and then it can give birth to all different kinds of plant life, animal life, mineral life, and eventually the bodies of Afua, Afua, human life. So before we go forward, let me see, you have any questions on that? Okay, so you said if it goes to ads, that's Ustream. Okay, yeah, so it does go to ads sometimes. So if it kicks into that, that just means you just keep waiting, it'll go through. Let me make sure I didn't miss a, hold on one second. Okay, so it's working for you now? All right. Okay, so any questions on that so far with regard to Atem? Okay. I'm just switching back over to this screen. All right. So now that's the basic cosmology dealing with that divinity. Now in Akan culture, the name of the Abosom is Odomankoma. Now Do and Dodo and Doe, all these different terms are connected to To and Ado and Adim, Atem, Tamu, and so forth. So Do means multitudinous, expansive, and so forth. You'll find that root also in ancient Kemet. You'll find Odom, Do, Mu, meaning to go down deep into or to penetrate. Odom, Odomu, and of course that's Atomu, Atemu, when the setting sun is going down and sinking and penetrating into the earth. You have Odomankoma, Odomankoma, or Odomankoma. Now, Akoma in Akan means heart, that just the organ, the heart. Now, that's critical because Atem is sometimes called Atem Khepra or Atmu Khepra. Now, Khepra is shown as a beetle, and we talked about how the three are connected. There are three different Abosom that function together, just like your two lungs and your heart and your brain. They are different entities, but they function together. And in fact, they can't function without one another. They are interdependent upon one another because of the connection between the sunrise and Khepra operating through the sunrise and Atem operating through the sunset. The explosive nature of fire and the consuming aspect of fire. That's Khepra, explosive, expansive, Atem, contractive. Khepra in the rising sun, Atem in the setting sun. That's why Tim also means to complete, to bring an end to, hard, compact substance. That's some of the basic definitions of Tim or Atem. Reason why it means complete, because that's the end of the day. To bring an end to finish, all complete, and then hard, compact substance because it's bringing things to a close and it's completing the creative process. Domu, setting down, sinking, penetrating. Atomu or Atemu, the sun setting down and penetrating. Now you have Akoma, which is the heart. You have Khepra, which is directly related to the heart. When a person died in ancient Kemet, one of the organs that was left inside the body, because the other organs were removed and placed in jars and governed by different divinities, the 4 sons of Heru, but the heart was left inside of the body. And then there was a heart talisman that was placed on the heart, a sacred talisman, which was usually inscribed with a specific prayer, because the heart itself was a shrine for an aspect of the spirit called the Ab, which is also the term for heart. And the Ab, or the heart, after death is weighed in the judgment scene against the feather of Ma'at. And as long as the heart is as light as the feather of Ma'at, of law and balance, then the person passes the test, and then they can move into Asamando, the ancestral realm. If they don't pass that test, then their heart is consumed by Amut, the divinity that consumes disorder. So the heart, there was a prayer inscribed on the heart talisman, appealing to the heart spirit, that entity, to not speak against the person when they go before Alsar and the other Abosom during that judgment scene. And that prayer, speaking to the heart, to the Ab, the heart spirit, the heart entity, saying, do not speak against me, that was inscribed on the heart talisman. The heart talisman was a Khepra, or a beetle. So, and it was a very, sometimes they're very ornate, and blue faience and different things, but you have that beetle, a large beetle, placed on the heart, and inscribed on the bottom of the beetle was a prayer to the heart. So now, Akoma means heart in ancient, in Akan culture. Then you have Khepra, or Khepr, but there are different pronunciations of the name Khepra. Sometimes it's pronounced Kepa, and you have the KH symbol, you have the P, you have the A or the E, and in Coptic, you'll find that the vowel placement between the KH symbol and the P symbol is an O. So instead of Khepra or Kepa, in Coptic, which is a late Kemetic dialect, it can be Khopa or Chopa. So Atem Khepra or Atem Khepra or Atmu Khopa is where we get Odomankoma or Odomankoma. Now, Khopa meaning Khepra, the beetle who's placed on the heart. Akoma in Akan culture is the heart itself. So Odomankoma is Temu Koma, or Atem and Khopa. And that's why we show in the article, etymologically, you'll find Atem and Khopa, or Atmu Khopa, Odomankoma, together. Now we also have different titles, different kinds of beetles in Akan culture. And then you'll find that just like you have Ab or Ab in Kemet, that means a heart. Ab also means beetle in ancient Kemet. We showed the Medutu, the hieroglyphics for that. Then Ab meaning beetle in Kemet. In Akan, Abba also means a kind of beetle. Amanquo also means a kind of beetle. Ankonam is a kind of beetle. These are all different kinds of beetles in Akan culture, and they're all associated with Odomankoma. You have Amanquo, so Odomanquo or Odomankoma. Ankonam, there's the term for heart is Akoma, but then there's another version called Okono. So Ankonam, Odomankoma, Odomankonama, all of these different things are related to, on one hand, the divinity, on the other hand, Khepra being called Khopa, the heart in Akan, and Khopa, the divinity in ancient Kemet. So Odomankoma, you'll find etymologically we run through the whole piece and we show the connection between Atem and Khopa Atem and Khepra in ancient Kemet, as well as in Akan, and we showed the cosmology and how they all work together. Okay, let me see. You said this is the 42 judges. I recall hearing years ago that we go through this every night during our sleep. Okay, so you could say, in a sense, it's not necessarily in the sleep per se. There may have been, I'm not sure exactly what they were referencing. They may have been talking about when you go to sleep and your spirit can make excursions into the spirit realm, and the spirit realm, of course, the ancestral realm, so you can go through that kind of process. But throughout the course of everyday life, that entire judgment scene with the 42 assessors of Ma'at at the top, and then you have the scales, you have the heart, you have the feather, then you have Asar sitting there with Aset and Nebet standing behind him, and Tahuti taking note of the judgment, and Anpu making sure, about to record what the balance is. You have all these different things going on. You have that going on every time you're about to make a decision. As soon as you're about to make a decision about what's going to be right or wrong, what's in harmony with order, what's out of harmony with order, you are at the judgment scene at that moment. If you engage in disorder and make a decision where you engage in disorder and you bring disorder to yourself, then your heart becomes heavy because it is weighted down with disorder and anxiety. When you're anxious, even physiologically, if you become anxious and flooded with, adrenaline to the heart, to that region throughout the blood system, the circulatory system, you'll say, my heart feels heavy. Well, that's a direct connection to the spiritual heart when it's on that scale against the feather of Ma'at. If your heart is heavy because you're engaged in disorder, then the scales will be imbalanced. Because the feather is called shu, but the word shu also means flame or fire. So either way, your heart can be, balanced by the lightness of a feather, but also by the flame. And that fire also means to burn, to purify, to destroy, like the destroying of the enemies. So it's not just about, at all turning the other cheek and light as a feather and forgiveness and foolishness like that. The word shu means feather, but the word shu also means flame. So the heart needs to balance those out. So every time you're in the midst of a decision, just like Yoruba people say you're at the crossroads, in ancient Kemet, you're at the judgment scene, and if you make the right decision, then the scales are balanced, and you can move forward, and you have guidance from the Nsamafo, guidance from the Abosom, empowerment from the Abosom to move ahead. If you engage in disorder, then you don't get to pass through that judgment scene. Your heart is consumed by Amet, and then you're engaged in disorder, self-destructive behavior. Okay, so we wanted to get to that. Hold on one second, I just want to check one part of I posted the article. I want to make sure I hit the points that some people had some questions on. The details of all of this, as far as the etymologies and everything, is in the article, but we just wanted to hit some of the points to make sure that people didn't have any questions with regard to certain nuances of the information in the article. Okay. Now, getting back to the Akan information with regard to Odomankoma. Hold on 1 second. Okay. You'll find that we posted information in the article talking about one of the appellations of Odomankoma in Akan culture. And this, in the Asona Abusia, or the Asona clan, they talk about how they had a shrine for an Abosom called Odomankoma. One of the appellations of this Abosom is Bona. Now, today, that deity, that shrine for that divinity, is called Adanse Bona. Adanse is the region. Adanse is a nation. The Adanse people, Adanse folk, in that region of Ghana, that's an ancient settlement that's hundreds of years old. The Adansi people in that region is one of the original settlements of the Akan when we were migrating from ancient Ghana and Mali nearly 1,000 years ago to move away from that region in the north because of Muslim invasions and other self-destructive activities some of our people were engaged in. So then we moved down towards the savannah and forest belt, and we reestablished Akan civilization in what is now Ghana and also what is in now Ivory Coast. Adanse was one of the major settlements and one of the first settlements of the reconstituted Akan civilization hundreds of years ago. So the Adanse portion of the title is just showing the region of the shrine. But the shrine itself, the shrine of Bona, a divinity, a great healer, a great protector, and so forth, that's the name of the divinity. That's an appellation. The divinity was called, and is called, Odomankoma. Now, this is a divinity, it's an oracle. We quote how they talked about people from different parts of the country, different regions, would come to the shrine of Odomankoma, or the shrine of Bona, to get oracular divination, get direction for certain things, and so forth. This is an Abosom, just like any other Abosom that people will go, get divination from and communicate with. They were not under the assumption that Odomankoma was the God of the universe and the creator of the whole universe. They knew Odomankoma was Bona, and this is an Abosom. One of the regions that the shrine of Bona was placed in, a sacred region, was called Bona Bone. And Bone means stony land, rocky land. Bon, B-O-N, means cave. But there was a stony region that once they migrated from where they were and they had to settle in a new region, they found a stony, rocky region, and they reestablished the shrine of Bona in that region, and that region was called Bona Bone, or the stony, rocky shrine place of the Abosom Bona. Now, we talked about Atem operating through the Bennu bird, the solar bird, the bird that flies over the primordial waters, and then when it sees that first primordial hill that rolls up out of the primordial ocean at the beginning of the world, then that Bennu bird sets on that stone, that raised, hard, stony land. And remember again, Tem means hard, compact substance. And Atem is the spirit operating through the Bennu bird. Now, Bennu is pronounced Bennu or Ben, or sometimes Ben, but it's spelled B-N-B-N in ancient Kemet. In Akan, you have the term Benna, just like Ben in ancient Kemet, Benna, but it's also sometimes pronounced Bona. So now you have Atem in ancient Kemet, was also called Atem Khepra, or Atem Khopa, or Temu Khopa, or Tumu Khopa. And in Akan you have Odomankoma. Again, Atem operating through the Ben, or the Bennu bird, and sits on the raised land, the stony land that first is established at the beginning of the world. Then you have Odomankoma, or Bona, Bennu, sitting on the stony region. They found a stony region to establish his shrine, and that's Bona Bone. Then they also, and we quote from this as well, they talked about Bona being the major divinity that governed the earth on the male side, and then Asaase Ya, being the female divinity of earth, and they governed most of the activities of the people there. So whenever anything that the people needed, they would go to Bona and Asaase Ya in that particular region. Again, Bona is the spirit of Benna, which is Atem, and then Asaase Ya, also Asaase Afua, or Afua, is the hand or the wife of Bona, the wife of Atem. So we show Odomankoma, and then we show Asaase Afua and Asaase Ya. We show in ancient Kemet Atem, and then we show Iusaaset Nebet and Iusaaset Nebet. And we're showing that these divinities are the same divinities with the same names, with the same sacred shrine spaces the stony region, the raised stone that the Bennu bird sits on, the Bona stone or the Bennu stone, and then in Akan, 2,000 years later, the Bena spirit or the Bona spirit gets a shrine that's established in the Bona bone, which is the shrine for the divinity. So we put all that information in the article to show that Atem migrated, of course, in our blood, in our souls, directly from ancient Kemet, Khanit, when we migrated to West Africa, then of course when we migrated from here through the enslavement process, forced migration into the Americas, we still have a connection to these Abosom directly from our Kra and directly from and through our blood circles. Okay. Any questions on that? Let me get a drink right quick. I'll be back. Okay. All right. So any questions? Any other questions on Bona? I know some people have sent some questions in the past, and we wanted to, I think we hit most of the detailed, covered most of the information that people had questions about. And if you, again, the details are in the article. But are there any questions, any other questions on Bona itself, that divinity itself? Okay, so because next week we're going to deal with Twedriampong, and with Twedriampong is Khepra, just another title of Khepra himself. Khopa is, one of the forms of the name, and that becomes Akoma, dealing with the heart in Akan. But then Twedriampong is a descriptive title of Khepra, and then we're going to go into Twedriampong as well. We did have a couple of questions on, since we were talking about Odomankoma and dealing with Bona Bone, and Bona being a major oracular divinity in the Akan culture, which has kind of fallen out of, prominence because of the infection of monotheism, but we're helping to make that, resurgence, especially here in the West, reestablishing these actual Abosom in the consciousness of the people. People have been asking, some people had questions about divination practices, just divination in general. There are many kinds of divinatory practices all across the continent and wherever we are, even when we migrated here. We do have an article called The Akan Origin of the Term Hoodoo, and it's talking about the term hoodoo, which is different from voodoo, but hoodoo being the North American practice of ancestral religion by Afua who had been enslaved in North America, and we retained our traditions. This is has nothing to do with European interpolations into the tradition, or people trying to incorporate some pseudo Native American practices in the tradition. We're talking about black people brought to North America, enslaved in North America, but throughout the process, we continue to practice our traditions that we carry with us. Our Nsamanfo was still with us, our Obosom was still with us. We use the practice, which is sometimes called hoodoo, and different things, and hoodoo is different from voodoo. Hoodoo is more, it's connected, in fact the term is, etymologically, it's an Akan term, and we go into detail about that, but they were different practices, just like voodoo was very prominent in New Orleans. Of course, voodoo was very prominent in Haiti, but then in Cuba, for example, the Yoruba tradition was very prominent. In Jamaica, the Akan tradition was culturally dominant. In certain parts of the South, in America, the Akan tradition was very prominent, and you will notice that when you look at the practices of hoodoo, because that's an Akan term, even though there were other people who incorporated their practices within that framework and under that rubric, but it was, a large percentage of people were actually culturally, ethnically Akan who were engaged in that practice. We posted an article dealing with conjure was another title of hoodoo, and rebellions, so-called rebellions or armed resistance against enslavement in North America. We posted that article, and we'll post it again. It's on our YouTube page. Let me give you the name of the group. Okay, so I'm sorry, not the YouTube page, the Facebook page. Okay, so we just posted it. So our Facebook page is afuraka.afuraikaet. And then on the Facebook page, we have a group, the AKANFO NANASOM group. And in that group, and it's posted now, so you can just search through some of the posts in the group, we have an article talking about conjure with respect to North American rebellions during the enslavement period. So they talk about a number of different things. They talk about a rebellion in what we would call 12,712, or European year 1712, and it was in New York. There was a rebellion. People were rising up against enslavement, and when they caught some of the people, there were like 21 people, and there are a number of different articles and references that this article deals with, but in one of these instances, they caught 21 people, and about 9 or 10 of the people who were part of this rebellion had Akan names. They had Kradane, like Kwesi and Kojo, and so forth. And then they go through a number of different rebellions that are related to people engaged in the practice of hoodoo, which motivated them to get up and organize to kill these crackers and free ourselves from enslavement. And they go through that whole, through a survey of different rebellions, some information that a lot of people do not have. But it's just showing that the Akan tradition was carried by us in our blood, in our akra. We brought it to North America. Wherever we were, we continued to practice what we had. Sometimes it's called hoodoo, sometimes it's called conjure, sometimes different things, but there are divinatory practices within these structures that we have constantly utilized for our benefit to help liberate us from enslavement, to establish what they would call maroon societies, free, independent, sovereign nations after we escaped from the plantations, and we defended those nations until the end of the enslavement period. So we freed ourselves during that time, and it was animated by our religious practices. It gave us the right mindset to realign with our Akra. And when you realign with your Akra, you know, of course, instantaneously, you have no business living under the domination of your enemy. So you're motivated to move forward and reestablish order, which also means to eradicate your enemy and reestablish your sovereignty. So conjure and hoodoo and so forth are all connected to that, and that includes the divinatory practices. So people had questions about what kinds of divinatory practices do Akan people utilize. Yes, they are utilize what they call the kuru, which is a divinatory pot, pouring libation to an Obosom, and in a sense a form of water gazing. There are divinatory practices with shells. There are divinatory practices even with hoodoo, where they use possum bones, and we show a picture that we got from one of the websites, and we list that website showing the possum bones that are used for divination, which we've been using for hundreds of years here in North America. The Obosom and the Nsamafo, depending on what your Abusia is, your matricircular clan, your Ntoro is your patricircular clan in divinity, your Akra, your Kradane Bosom, they will give you different forms of divination based on who you are, based on your trustery, or they will reveal to you or put you in contact with different forms of divination where people were engaged in that process that have been utilized in the past. For example, not only with the possum bones with North American hoodoo, but there was an instance that we mentioned on the website, and you can read that in the AKANFO NANASOM group, where we were talking about a divinatory practice through an experience that we had a number of years ago, where the Nsamafo informed us that mice were messengers from Asaase Afua, and they were sent to give us messages in a divinatory fashion. And if we could, if we learn their movements and learn that, what's going on with them, basically, we can get information from the Nsamanfo. We can get information from the Obosom, from mice. Now, that was given to us a number of years ago. And years later, we were on a website and we saw a thing called mouse divination amongst the Akan people in the Ivory Coast. So for thousands of years, hundreds of years, as well as thousands of years, some Akan people have been using the Gebekre, or the mouse divination system, where they say that in their trustery, in their oral trustery, that in the past, mice used to be able to talk. And then one time a spiritualist went and got some mice and brought them into a village, and there's a specific kind of vessel. They put the mice in and they ask them questions. Spiritually, they engage in ritual, and based on the movements of the mice with sticks that are placed and some other elements that are placed inside the divinatory oracular vessel, based on the movements of the mice and how they move the sticks, they can divine about the answers to the questions. They can get direct information. They've been using that system for years. Now, when we were given that information years prior, we had no knowledge of a mouse divination system amongst the Akan in Ivory Coast. And remember, in Ivory Coast, which is next door to Ghana, there are about 11 million Akan people in Ghana. They're about 45% of the population, the largest ethnic group. And then next door in Ivory Coast, there are about 9 million Akan in Ivory Coast, and they're about 42% of the population. So there are almost as many Akan people in Ivory Coast as there are in Ghana. So the Baule, one of the major Akan groups in Ivory Coast, they use the mouse divination system. This is something that our Nsamanfo informed us about here years before we got on the internet and saw that Akan people use a mouse divination system. So that's just a specific example of how our Akan Nsamanfo will communicate to us about specific Akan practices that we may not have any knowledge of just by reading or studying or anything like that, because we have a direct connection with our Nsamanfo that will give us direct information about specific practices related to our specific ethnic group. Okay, and that's the same thing, not just Akan, but just across the board. Your Afura Akani, Afura Akaini, so you can communicate with your Nsamanfo and they will give you specifics about who you are. They'll give you names, they'll show you images, they'll draw you to specific kinds of clothing or specific artifacts or a specific mode of doing certain things, certain foods you want to stay away from, certain social practices or certain social taboos that you'll find that you have, and dietary taboos that you find that you had for years, and you find out later on when you reconnect with people from that group or you read about that specific ethnic group, it turns out they have the same dietary taboos, social taboos, and so forth. So I think I saw a comment. Okay, so she said, the sister said, all we did in the West was adjust the implements based on what was accessible here. In other words, coconut shells for obi and so forth. Exactly. So that's what we're talking about. Once we got here, we didn't lose a connection to the Obosom. We didn't lose a connection to the NANASOM and Nsamanfo. We didn't lose a connection to our Akra, people who were sincere about maintaining their culture. Our Nsamanfo are connected to us wherever we go. So we didn't lose our practices of divination. Very often we get taught that our culture was only preserved in Brazil and Haiti and Cuba and in Jamaica and in the islands in the Caribbean and in South America, but nothing was preserved outside of some form of, like New Orleans voodoo. Nothing else was preserved. We were totally destroyed in North America, and we didn't have any traditions except for some little voodoo here and there and some juju, and that's it. And it's usually talking about some form of Haitian voodoo, some form of New Orleans voodoo, something dealing with the Loa, something dealing with Dambala, or different spirits like that. But when we look through the trustery, you'll find evidence of Akan culture manifest in North America across the board. It turns out that one of our greatest liberators, Nat Turner, who got together a number of brothers and started killing the Odwirafo, one of the reasons why we freed ourselves from enslavement, because of acts like the one that Nat Turner began. He was an Akan person. Harriet Tubman was Akan. They actually have a statue of Harriet Tubman in the Asante region in Ghana, because her family members always said that she was told that she was Asante. When they write about her, they often say Kuramanti, but that was usually a term from writers in the 1800s and 1900s when they're talking about Akan people. They would call them Kuramanti because of a region of what is now Ghana, in the Kuramanti region, so they just label anybody who was Akan Kuramanti, which is different from Guromanchi, a different group from Burkina Faso. But even though it is related, but they were talking about Akan people. So her family members always told her she was Asante, or she told her family members that they were Asante, and that's where she came from. And then I saw a site recently talking about DNA tests were done on some of the family members, and they were able to verify that they did have that Akan Asante lineage. So they actually have a statue of Harriet Tubman in the Asante region in Ghana. So another person that was liberating people from enslavement happened to be an Akan person. Both Harriet Tubman as well as Nat, they would say that they communicated with the spirits. When people are writing about them, especially when they're talking about Nat Turner, or we would say Nat or Okufo Nat, warrior Nat, they were always, when they're writing about him, they're talking about the Bible and all this other foolishness. When he's talking about he was communicating and the spirits were communicating with him and the deities were communicating with him, these are ancestral spirits, these are Obosom. When the whites and their offspring are writing about it, they try to stick Jesus Christ in there. When Harriet Tubman was getting possessed, and when she would come out of a possession, they would call an epileptic fit. And when she would come out of a possession, she would have the specific instructions about what direction people needed to go to when they were out there in the wilderness trying to find their way from, escaping from the plantations. She liberated hundreds of people and never lost, as they say, never lost a passenger on the Underground Railroad. But when she would get possessed, and when she would come out of possession, she would know which way to go, and she never got caught after going back, down south numerous times to liberate people. So this is part of our ancestral culture at work. These two were Akan people. We found a number of different, people in that article. You'll see there are a number of different groups, individuals that they have found to be Akan, as well as other ethnic groups. But we're just showing that our culture didn't die out. When you look at the nuances and the things that people are writing about, you'll find that actually these are the workings of Nsamanfo operating through some of our people and directing them to establish, grand plans of insurrection like Gabriel Prosser, Denmark Vesey. They talk about those in the article as well, and you'll find that a number of the people associated with them, especially the people who had to do with getting the spiritual aspect together, having people engaged in conjure work or hoodoo, and motivating people to get bold, to get strong, be focused on liberation and moving on that, including some people who they had grand plans to poison the water supply, poison the food supply, and so forth. Those things struck fear in the hearts of the whites and their offspring. So even if the grand plan of liberation didn't happen, the whites and their offspring were forced by our actions and our plans to actually end the process of enslavement. And actually we ended it because of what we did, because they feared that if they continued, we would figure out a way to exterminate all of them. And we would have exterminated all of them. So then they moved in a different direction. They had to free us from physical enslavement, but they had to put in process a new form of enslavement. And it was right around those times, in the mid to late so-called 1800s, when they began forcefully pushing Christianity on the so-called slaves, because they knew that was a form of mental enslavement that would be more effective than even the physical enslavement. So they started moving in that direction. So just like Akan people and others helped to free our people from physical enslavement, now we need to free ourselves from mental and spiritual enslavement. And this is part of our process. Okay, so the question was, so how should we, okay, you said how should we view mice in the diaspora? Will these mice be raised in captivity or feral? Okay, so it just, it really depends on your lineage. And that's why it's critical to, and I know you know this, but it's critical to connect with your Nsamafo. Depending on what group you come from, you have, for example, on the lowest level, you have dietary taboos or restrictions. On the lowest level, those are allergens. Some things you can eat, some things will make you break out and have all kinds of physical problems. Because you can't, even somebody in your family may be able to eat a certain food, but you can't eat a certain food. That's a dietary restriction, a prohibition for you. That's like a taboo. Then on higher levels, because of your ethnic group, because of your ancestral descent, there are certain things that are taboo for you that will create spiritual disalignment for you, for your clan, whereas somebody else, it wouldn't be a problem. That's why some people have Achenebois, or everybody has Achenebois or animal totems that's associated with their clans, with their groups. Certain animals you cannot harm, certain animals you can't deal with in certain ways. So it's important to connect with your Nsamafo first, dealing with anything, dealing with spirituality, so you can find out, or at least be in tune with them and in tune with your Okra. So if you start moving in a direction that's actually taboo for you, or dealing with certain animals or foods or even stones or gems or whatever that's actually taboo for your clan, that will create spiritual disorder within yourself, within your spirit, then at least if you're connected with your Nsamafo, even just cursory connection, it will at least urge you away from that until you can have a more clear dialogue with them. So I say all that to say, the way we would utilize that kind of divination system today is based on our ancestry. Some people may not be able to utilize that kind of system. It may be taboo for them to deal with mice at all. Then somebody else, if they're connected with a clan where that's not a problem, then based on their interaction, we wouldn't necessarily need to cultivate. We may use a very similar vessel. And I posted a picture of the vessel and just a short bit of information in the AKANFO NANASOM group on the website. And it's also in our afuraka.ning.com site. And let me post that up there for you. Because in fact, that's where we got the information to post in the Ning group. We just copied and pasted from our network. And for those who don't know, we have a network, Afuraka, NANASOM and Homa network, and that's the link. So we have a number of forums. We have a forum with a number of threads on a number of different subjects dealing with just ancestral religion in general, whether it's Akan, Yoruba, Ewe, Igbo, dealing with ancient Kemet and Knesset and so forth. So we have a lot of information, a number of people who are on the same page studying the same things. So you can check that forum out. You can join the forum, and we have a lot of information. And that's where we got the information that we just posted it from that forum onto the AKANFO NANASOM site. But we show an image of one of the Gebekre vessels, the mouse divination vessels, that can be utilized as well. So your Nsamafo and your Okra will guide you towards the manner in which you will deal with them. So I don't want to give, a specific means. It has to be guided by the Nsamafo. Just like they just gave me the actual basis, the cosmological basis for working with mice in a divinatory fashion. And then that was probably, it may have been at least 11 years later when I came across that information on the internet that said that Akan people have a mouse divination system, and specifically that mice came, messengers from Asaase Afua that come from the Earth Mother to give us lessons, from the Earth Mother to give us lessons, to give us information from the Earth Mother and from the Nsamafo, because that's exactly what they told me. So the Nsamafo will give you specifics about how you need to move forward. Some people will use, other forms like coconut divination systems, shell divination. Some people will use Nserewa, Akan for cowrie shells. Some people will use seashells, or just depends. It depends on your lineage. It depends on your ancestry. So we just wanted to address that. It's critical dealing with any of these kind of ritual practices that you establish some form of nkomre first. You deal with your NANASOM and Nsamafo first to get aligned with who you are culturally, who you are ethnically as an Afua person, because that also starts to align you with what you should accept into your life and what you should reject. Of course, we reject spirits of disorder, whites and their offspring, their culture and pseudo-religions, but then even amongst our own population, amongst our own people, there are certain things, certain foods, certain social behaviors, certain activities that based on your clan, based on your ancestry, based on your ethnicity, and your true history as a people who migrated to different areas, lived in riverine areas or mountainous regions, or by large lakes or forest regions or desert regions. There are certain taboos, certain restrictions that are associated with you, and you need to connect with your Nsamafo so you can learn how to navigate your way through life in a harmonious way. And then you also begin to deal with your Kra as well. Okay. So any other questions on any of that information? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to leave it here, but the next session is going to deal with Tredriampong. That's another creative divinity. Of course, we said that's a major title of Khepra. In ancient Kemet is Khepra or Khopa, and Akan, Akoma, but also Tredriampong. Again, this is not just another form of Nyankompong. Nyankompong is Ra, Tredriampong is Khepra, and we're going to go into detail about that next week. So you can go to our website and we have an article dealing with that. Okay, and the sister also said, and it won't be just one ethnic group, lineage, or tradition, because we have two sides of lineages. Yeah, so that's also in our, especially with us here, we typically, blood-wise, have some mixtures from different Afua ethnic groups. So because of enslavement, through that whole perverse process, we mixed. Of course, as we say in Wabojida, your okra cannot be mixed. Your soul might be mixed. Your blood might be mixed, but your okrawa, cannot be mixed. So as a spirit in Asamando, in the ancestral realm, you may watch your descendants mixing blood-wise generation after generation with different groups. Maybe your Akan descendants connect with some Igbo or some Yoruba or Ewe on the plantations of enslavement and so forth, and there's a blood mixture, but you're still connected to those Akan descendants. So when it's time for you to reincarnate generations later, you're still that Akan spirit who used to live in Adanse 300 years ago. Now you're returning to the world through one of your direct blood descendants, Akan descendants. But when you are invested in that womb, when you're born, your blood may be mixed with different groups. You have a connection to some Igbo people, Yoruba people, Ewe people, Bambara people, and so forth. But you're the same Akan spirit, connected to the same Abosom, family Abosom, patrilineal Abosom, matrilineal Abosom, and of course the Kradim Bosom that you were connected to previously. So you'll be sent into the world, but you will have a blood connection to other Afua people, so you'll have an affection for those people that you didn't have before. So there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's a good thing. That's a positive thing, because we'll have a respect, because we'll have a direct linkage to those different groups, so that creates a form of Pan-Africanism in a sense. Of course, any other non-Afurakani, non-Afurakaitni blood pollution, your body rejects that, and you really have no connection to those spirits of disorder. You're not under any obligation, and in fact, the only obligation you're under is to reject them. You don't, include them in any shrine work unless you're trying to eradicate them, but you don't embrace them on any level whatsoever. Okay. I saw that comment. So cool. So yeah, the next session is Twedrian poem. You can download that article directly from the Odwirafo website. Check out the afuraikai.ning.com site for the information on the forums and so forth. For questions, you can go to that site. We check that site on a regular basis. You can also send us questions on our email address. Let me post that right quick. In fact, you can send it to the NANASOM at odwirafo.com email address. Okay, so that's it. So all right, so Medase for checking us out. If you have any questions, hit us up. And next week at 7 p.m., we'll be going through the information on Twedrian poem. Medase.